So let's continue. The three of you have offered remarks. You've made some interactions among yourselves. Let's now turn to you gathered here. And because time is what it is, let's use this convention. Three of you will be recognized, and I invite you to simply state the question that you feel very called to raise for all of us. And it's not the moment for long commentary, it's the moment for a question. And then that will help our panelists to take your questions and to reflect upon it as the people that they are. So let's follow that procedure. There's help in the house to find a way for a person to identify themselves if they have a question and a way to get to a microphone. And we'll just do the three questions right in a row. And then that'll give the panelists the chance to reflect on your own question. So with help from the house, we'll identify the people, and they'll maybe introduce only your name, if you will, and then the question that you have in your heart.
Yes, go.
Please.
Marcella Christensen. I have a question that Noah raised about impartiality and compassion. I was really curious, isn't it possible to be compassionate and remain impartial for a state or an individual? And I struggle with this myself. Does compassion necessarily lead to partiality? So I'd like to hear what you said, and the example of Switzerland answered part of that, but I think there's more I'd like to hear.
Thank you. Another, please. Anybody that has a question from there, please, yeah.
My name is Jerry Brady. This question goes to the reaction to compassion or the call to compassion. I think there's often a way overstated counterreaction. We're asked to reach out to people who need our compassion, and people feel unable to do it. And they become very hostile, in fact, to people in distant lands, to people unlike themselves. They get weary of 50 years, the civil rights movement, and their kind is maybe that's the backlash that is Brexit and the recent election. But what I'm curious about is that response to the attempt to be compassionate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Madam, you're right behind there, please. Oh, okay. Sorry,
This is an aside. Are you related to Bill Maher, the lawyer professor?
Related to Bill Maher? Not
Yes.
to my knowledge.
Sound very much like him. Karen Armstrong, thank you very much for coming. I'm not from Louisville, I'm from Canada, where Justin Trudeau is and feminism and everything else. What I find disappointing, I've lived in many places, traveled many places, studied theology, studied religion, studied you, and just how discouraging it is to come back to Louisville, that education is not valued as much as it should be. There are essential truths, and you know this: universal health care, universal education. If society and their state provided those items like they do in Sweden, the world would be a better place. And the lack of understanding in the richest country in the world disturbs me greatly. And how do you feel about that?
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take one more, so we're making it 4, but so go ahead and then we'll go. We have to simply because of time.
Hi, my name's Ruth Newman, and this question I have actually came in my mind yesterday with the cities, but I had a question because there is this internal conflict with authority and rules and then openness and compassion. Is there a futuristic view of any of you that maybe cities are a better kind of an organization maybe than nation states and Kentucky, that maybe we're evolving into a different form of combining authority with compassion through cities, maybe?
Thank you. And you're standing, so we take your question, yeah?
Oh,
and then that'll be the last, just with everybody's goodwill.
And if you don't have time to answer it, because I am sort of added on, I understand, but it's sort of a bit related. Noah, you talked about this idea that we need a state to be able to create the space for compassion and mercy towards each other. It struck me that what we probably need is a state that encompasses all of us. And I wonder first, the question really is, do you believe in this panel that we as human beings have the capacity to create such a state? And if so, what would it look like? In the singing that we just heard, we heard this idea that it was that it was sort of the broken cry. And it strikes me that it's in that space of suffering and our shared connection towards each other to want to eliminate suffering in the other that is the place where we understand each other greatest. More than anything else, it's through our suffering and understanding and empathizing with each other's suffering. So I don't know whether that adds to my question or not, but this idea of what does it look like? Is it even possible from us as human beings to create such a place? All right, that's enough.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Let's start, and panelists, you're invited to be as synthetic as you can be, and to combine the directions of the questions, and to choose among them to synthesize the sharing that you would like to make as we conclude the session. So, whomever would like to start us, most welcome.
I'll start with the lady who addressed me about education. I don't know about the Canadian educational system, but I would say that the British educational system is, I think, deteriorating. It's important that we know about technology and science, vital, but I think the humanities are also crucial. The language, literature, history. History is no longer a required subject. And so we don't learn from the past. And so I think this is something that concerns me greatly for the future. And I think technology is a wonderful thing, but it's giving people the impression that you can make a profound statement in 140 characters. And this seems to be a dangerous development.
Is this a little bit of British understatement that we're doing? Thank you very much.
Picking up on Karen's point about technology and trying to synthesize it with the point about a state. I mean, one thing we have, the internet, which we usually use a capital I, and we talk about it like it's a thing, and what a gift it is, and who, if you dreamed it up and pitched this group or pitched the TED group and said, I'm going to build a globally interconnected network, it's like, yeah, good luck. Right, but here we are, it's been given to us, and it's fragile. I had the great privilege of sitting next to the guy who really did discover, invented TCP/IP, Vint Cerf, an amazing guy at his 50th wedding anniversary. And he shares the story. He's like, yeah, we talk about internet as a noun. He's like, it used to be a verb. Oh. And it's internetworking. And in the early days, late 60s, early 70s, he would call to his colleagues in California. He's like, would you like to internetwork together? And it's like, would you like to dance? And I think we've lost a little bit of that.
Very, very helpful, Matthew. Thank you. Noel?
Well, I would say that I don't think that we're capable of a single world state, but the aspiration, when it's seen in a positive way, not as a let's govern everybody, but as a let's treat all human beings equally and value everyone's interests equally, then it's a great aspiration. The trick is to have the one without the other, to have the let's include everybody without thinking that one centralized entity will govern. I think the latter is frightening because I think it is beyond our capacities.
You never saw Star Trek?
Well, maybe it's because I did. similarly, the city-state, and there have been examples. I mean, I should just add, there have been examples of states that have tried to rule the world, and it generally doesn't always go so well. And then there are also examples of city-states in history, and those city-states can accomplish extraordinary things, and have accomplished extraordinary things, and then they've also done some lousy things, including through the insularity that's produced by the city-state structure. So what we're stuck with, not because we desire it, but what we're stuck with is something that's in some way in between these levels of generality. And that goes to this question of, is impartiality compatible with compassion? And I think my answer to that is that in a certain way it is, and in a certain way it isn't. It is incompatible in that when I think about the people I care most for, I want to care more for them than I want to care for other humans. And that's, I think, in the end, good. I remember reading in the newspaper that the great, very brilliant utilitarian philosopher Peter Singer, who's always been a strong advocate of treating all, not only humans, but all sentient beings with equal concern in a range of different dimensions, had pulled some strings to help, I think it was his mother, get into a nursing home. And I thought that was the best thing I'd ever heard. I thought that was great. Any inconsistency is beside the point, right? I mean, to love one's own family more than one loves somebody else is on some level necessary, and it's not, that's partiality. That's good partiality. So in that sense, it is incompatible with perfect, compassion is incompatible with perfect impartiality. But in another sense, they are compatible, and that is, if I can try to imagine the capacity to feel compassion beyond my immediate circle, or my immediate city, or my immediate state, or my own country, if I could try to feel some sense of compassion, then perhaps that sort of compassion could be felt impartially for everybody. And then the question is it still compassion at that point? Has it at that point become an abstract sense of fairness that loses all of its compassionate qualities? It might be, but it might not be. And in many religious traditions, especially mystical religious traditions, that's the moment of connection to the one, which is very universal and is very impartial. It's also only achieved by a tiny number of great masters, of geniuses, really, of religious experience. But that's a good thing for the rest of us to aspire to if we can comprehend it, which I'm not always sure that I can.
Where does God fit in? It depends what you mean by God. We are often talking about God today with a kind of an idiocy that despite our great sophistication in many matters, I think the talk about God is ineffable. God is a pointer to the ineffable. And I would say too that we are all striving for the ineffable, but it is unspeakable and unknowable and unquantifiable. But I would say that unless we can love people close to us, then compassion becomes an abstract, chilly exercise. I lived in a community as a young nun where there was utter impartiality, and it was utterly cold and often unkind, unintentionally. Confucius, he's one of my favorites, as you may have gathered. I speak about him a lot. But he said, you start by in the family. The family is the school of compassion. It's where you learn to love and be engaged. And then from that experience, which never goes away because your family is always with you, you inch out further and further. But that warm heart always has to be there, otherwise it becomes simply abstract.
Yes, and maybe if I could pick up on that point and answer the gentleman from over here and the question around outreach, and when you make efforts to outreach and it seems to not be appreciated, or maybe the opposite of appreciated. First of all, I think the word outreach is kind of I mean, imagine to be the recipient of outreach. Right? It's like random hands coming at you. It's not a fun feeling. So I think outreach is not a great word. The trendy word that's better is engagement, but that's sort of been so used that maybe it's losing its value. But I'm reminded, sir, of this great test of whether it's working or not. I was seated next to this very famous stand-up comedian in Britain named Jimmy Carr, who he's sort of, you could think Richard Pryor or Amy Schumer, I mean, or Bill Maher, I guess, a little bit. But, and so I was saying, and I always had this question, and he's the only stand-up comic I've ever been seated next to. So I asked him, I said, Jimmy, if you're trying out 10 new jokes up in Leeds or something, how many will get a laugh? And he said, well, right now, I'm pretty good. I'm like, yeah, right now, Jimmy. He said, well, like 3 out of 10. And I was like, oh, that's sort of comforting as someone practicing diplomacy, that 3 out of 10 is a success. But what he said next is what really struck me. He said, but jokes are funny things. And then he corrected. He's like, jokes are strange things. I said, okay. He said, if someone performs a song like we just heard, and it's amazing, and let's say someone performs a song unlike the one we just heard that nobody likes, it's still a song. He said, if you put on a play, Merchant of Venice, whatever, and everybody walks out, it's still a play. He said, if you tell a joke and nobody laughs, it's just a sentence. And I was like, well, I just met, but I was like, that's profound. Who told you that? He's like, no one told me that. I was like, have you said that before? He's like, I've never said that before. I was like, okay, I'm going to dine out on that for a long time. Because I think as we leave this festival and we go back to our lives and practice our form of lowercase d diplomacy here domestically, let's apply the Jimmy Carr test. And I think a lot, whether it's 140 characters or other things, a lot of times our, quote, outreach is just a bunch of sentences.
Very good. So let me connect the wonderful offerings that you've been sharing with the wide phenomena that's going on among the religious communities. People around the world are indeed beginning to collaborate with each other. It's not an epiphenomena. It is actually on the front lines of where our human history is going. And they're not changing their religions for the most part. In fact, they're gently nudging each other and confiding, and they're not talking about their doctrines. They're talking about spiritual maturity and wisdom. You understand me better than some of my own people. And I've heard this again and again. And there's a convergence that is occurring. And the convergence is on human dignity. It's not given by a state. It's not given by a religion. It's not given by a family. It's for lack of any other way to speak. It is given by the very source of our existence, however we name that, the eternal Buddha or God or some other way. But they're equally convinced, representatives of all the traditions trying to be faithful to their tradition, that human dignity is utterly connected to the common good. You can't isolate it from the common good. The common good has to nurture all of us, and each of us has to, in turn, contribute to that common good. And that reciprocity provides to those assembled, those religious communities, a kind of standard as to whether our own personal performance is falling short. Are we injuring human dignity? Are we abusing our common good? And so I think, Noah, you were noting the aspirational quality of our statement of unity and of our statement of commitment, confidence, even referring to American political history as an aspirational form. And I think that's absolutely right. But people are now forming that consensus. And we all know that we fall short. And we all know that we need mercy. And I think that the best political form, if we use the tension that Shakespeare offered to us, will always fall short. And therefore, the cultivation of mercy and the evaluation of our institutions from the point of view of mercy or compassion is always before us. The great joy is that now we're in solidarity in our differences in that task. So I think our panelists have taken us far down this road. What you're doing, I think, is profoundly resonant with the percolations that are going on within the human heart and within the human communities around the world. So we thank the three of you for all you are and all you've done. Thank you.